What's going on, guys? I hope all is well. Life has been a little hectic. Some of you may know I am having my first kid. I'm also clearing out all of my debt. So, to say the least, it's been a bit stressful. And one thing that I like to do when I'm stressed is go back and watch comfort movies and TV shows. And I've spent so much time watching and rewatching shows for the channel that it's been months since we've taken a deep dive into a movie. It's been almost 10 years since this movie was released, and it's still being talked about in this nerdosphere, or whatever you want to call it, that we do. And it's kind of interesting to see how the conversation about this movie has shifted. I won't say that everyone is changing their minds about it, because there are a ton of people who still despise this movie. But I've seen more and more people come to appreciate it for what it was. It's always been a movie that I've loved revisiting, and with the Man of Steel 2 rumors, I figured it's as good a time as any to go back and take a look again. So let's talk about the good, the bad, and the controversial. Let's talk about Man of Steel.
Damn.
It's kind of hard to talk about Man of Steel without talking about the men behind it, and first up would be Zack Snyder. He's kind of become one of the most polarizing and or hated directors, at least in this space of comic book movies. I mean, people used to hate Michael Bay, but they hate Michael Bay the way they hate Nickelback. You talk trash, but if a song comes on, you're gonna sing along.
Look at this graph.
Sometimes his stories can feel a little bit bloated, and his more cynical, nihilistic viewpoint on the world can definitely come off heavy sometimes. He also has some trademarks. The majority of his movies do deal with religion in one way, shape, or form. Most of the front men for his movies are gonna be big, strong, burly, manly men. They're gonna be extremely confident and have a lot of traits to that stereotypical dude bro. And in some way, shape, or form, the world or the things that they've experienced is going to have broken them in some way. All of his front men do carry a lot of similar characteristics, and he deals with a lot of characters that are already created and have a certain image, and he likes to flip those on their head. And depending on how you feel about him as a director, you might find it interesting or you might hate it. And look, to preface, I'm no Snyder cultist, or what my guy Tex calls himself, a Snyder bro, but I do tend to enjoy most of his movies. With this one, I feel like Man of Steel is his magnum opus, so to speak. But he wasn't the only one responsible for bringing this film to light. The other two responsible for bringing this movie is the dynamic duo of Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer, aka the dynamic duo that brought you the Dark Knight trilogy. If you notice, this film shares a lot of structural similarities to Batman Begins. We get glimpses into their childhood, then we get them as adult, kinda grifting and being out on their own and soul searching, then they return home, become a symbol, and fight the big bad in the final act. Now, if Nolan directed this film, it would definitely have been a little different, because Snyder and Nolan are two very different directors, but I think the messaging and the story would have still been pretty much the same. To be honest, whether it would have been Snyder, Nolan, or someone else, Man of Steel was pretty much destined to be what it was going to be. It was always going to be a darker, grittier, and more action-packed Superman movie. WB thought everyone wanted a heartfelt, more emotional tale that reminded them of the Donner movies, so that's what they tried to give us with Superman Returns, and it just simply didn't work. It wasn't a bad film, and honestly, that was the first live-action Superman movie I had ever seen at the time. I enjoyed it, but I think most people wrote it off as a failed recreation of what they did with Christopher Reeves. They also made some interesting creative choices that left a pretty lukewarm response. So whether you love or hate Man of Steel, you can't blame Warner Brothers for feeling like they had to go in a different direction. Honestly, that's a cycle that's been happening with Superman in the comics as well. But at the end of the day, I just think this iteration went a little too far left for a lot of people. Although people wanted more action and danger, I think most people were still expecting something a little closer to the boy in blue that they remember from their childhood. Everyone's friend who always has a smile on his face and is equal parts cool and kinda dorky. And obviously this version was nothing like that. Outside of moments with his loved ones, his personality can be a little cold and distant, but understandably so. And I think that's why this version of the character resonated with me. Is it a little edgy? Yes. And can it be a little emo at times? Sure. But underneath all of that, this is still Superman at his core. He's still extremely kind-hearted, he still wants to help people, and he still throws himself in harm's way to save others. He just hasn't quite grown into being that confident leader that we usually see him as. Pretty much every Superman movie does his origin in the beginning, and the second half will skip to him already being a seasoned hero. As to where this film, this entire movie, dealt with him in that gear of becoming that Superman that we know and love, experiencing all of those things that makes him set certain rules in place for the future. I think it was really jarring for a lot of people to see that this version of Clark is just as lost, confused, and scared as we are. He has to handle loss and grief in the same way that we do, and he has a lot of bottled up anger and frustration that he doesn't always handle properly. He was bullied the majority of his childhood, and he could never fight back due to his alien circumstance. He always found himself constantly faced with dilemmas where he wanted to do more, but his father didn't think the world was ready to know a superpowered alien walked among them. And I know some people have issues with the way Jonathan Kent was portrayed, but I thought it was handled beautifully, in most cases. The interaction with his parents were honestly the most heartfelt parts of the film, and they really made Superman feel real and tangible and human to me. Also, in most superhero movies in general, heroes discovering their powers is almost always shown as fun and happy. It's usually portrayed with a lot of awe and wonder, but here it's played out kind of like a horror film. When Clark starts discovering his powers, he's pretty much terrified, and his mom has to come pick him up from school. Even when he saves his classmates, it's not a really big triumphant moment. His parents fear that he might be found out and that the government might come for him, and it's yet another reason for his classmates to think he's even weirder than they already did. Even as a person who really enjoys this film, I do think if it had just a couple of more moments of levity, that it would have been far better received by the critics and general audience. Although I do disagree with the take that this movie isn't hopeful or inspirational, it is very heavy, and those moments of levity could have helped out a lot. And unlike a lot of other iterations, he doesn't find out who he is or where he's from until he's a grown man in his 30s. 33 years old to be exact, a little on the nose for sure, but definitely a great subversion. This Clark has spent the majority of his adult life bouncing from city to city, country to country, trying to understand who he is, trying to figure out why is he so different. They really wanted to nail home the context of how would Superman be if he lived in our world today? How would he coexist with us? How would humanity react to him? How would we feel knowing that we're no longer the top of the food chain, knowing that aliens existed? What would that mean for the government, our national security, and our armed forces? And as I talked about in my video with the boys and hero deconstruction, that's not a context that is going to appeal to everyone. Everyone simply isn't a fan of the what if superheroes were real concept. And look, full transparency, if I was asked if I wanted a darker toned and more edgy Superman film, I probably would have said no. I've honestly never been a fan of those dark Superman stories, outside of maybe Injustice. But as a sci-fi movie fan, this film just checks all the boxes for me. And let's just talk about the elephant in the room, aka Superman killing Zod. I can understand how this decision could be jarring for a lot of people, seeing Superman kill. But the code of Superman not killing in the comics is iffy at best. He's always self-defense killed, especially when it came to creatures who proposed a threat to Earth in its entirety who he couldn't just lock up. This scene is extremely controversial for a lot of reasons. One being, so many people say that this family could have just ran away, but this family was used as a surrogate. This family was representative of humanity. As Zod and Feora said, they would not stop until every human was dead. For every one you save, we will kill millions more. Zod vividly told him his sole purpose for living was to kill humans. In the long run, what could Superman have done? Would he just hold him in a headlock for the rest of eternity? Would he just fight and hope that Zod would give up and become tired? He just learned to fly 2 days ago. He's never been in a fight in his life, and he's fighting against trained soldiers, and they're just as strong, if not stronger, just as fast, if not faster. He can't just lock Zod up. At this point, they just found out about Kryptonians. They just found out aliens exist. Nobody knows that kryptonite exists yet. We see they find out later in Batman v Superman, but as far as Man of Steel, there's no way to stop or contain a Kryptonian. But yet people were still very angry about this decision, and part of me slightly understands. Even as a person who loves this movie, it is a little jarring to see Superman snap someone's neck. It was definitely a ballsy move, but it was one that I deeply respect. I feel Snyder sometimes makes decisions based off divisivity and even shock value, but this one was extremely poetic. You have a man who searched his entire life for the tiniest shred of evidence about where he's from, because he couldn't quite relate to the place that he was sent to. He spent a life in curiosity, wanting to know what his home was like and who his real or biological family was. And now that last remaining link to his home planet is right in front of him. And as tempting as it is to follow what he's been chasing this whole time, he makes the decision to choose Earth. He chooses humanity. I've seen a lot of criticism of this movie, and most of it comes down to what Superman should or shouldn't be, and what Superman would or wouldn't do. But I watch this movie and see the rawest, the realest, and most tangible version of the character I've ever seen on live action. Beyond the SNYDERISMs, explosions, and bombastic action sequences, I think these guys knew exactly who Superman is and what he stands for. If comparing the Superman live action catalog to Batman, I look at Man of Steel like the Batman Begins of Superman movies. And the most damaging thing to this movie's legacy is that we never got to see a sequel. But hey, my objective with these videos is never to get someone to change their minds about a movie or show, but simply to provide a different perspective. And my perspective isn't the right one, it's just mine. But I'd love to know what you think about Man of Steel down in the comments.